A ver, debe funcionar.
Wait, let's see. Well, the invasion dynamics of the house mouse in Africa. As probably you know, Mus musculus is a species complex formed by three subspecies. Mus musculus musculus is present in the north of Asia. Mus musculus castellnaus is present more in the south, and Mus musculus domesticus is the subspecies with more distribution is present in the western of Europe, in America, in North America, Central and South America, and in Africa. In particular, Mus musculus domesticus, also known as the Western house mouse, has a strong commensal relationship with humans. This strong commensal relationship started here in West Asia approximately 15,000 years ago, and according to archaeological evidence, it could happen because the humans provide a resource for the mouse, also because the humans reduce the predator of this species, and also because humans provide a good or better environment for the house mouse. From this time, when the strong commensal relationship started, the human start dispersing the house mouse first across Europe and then around the world. According to genetic evidence, this study evidence that the house mouse in Europe is divided in three big genetic groups. One group in the north of Europe, another group in the Mediterranean, and another group in the Peninsula Iberica. The genetic data also show that the divergence between the native range of the species in West Asia and the first stage of the introduction, the colonization of the house mouse in Europe was about 5,000 years ago. In North America, genetic data also suggests that the population of the house mouse present in the east coast of the United States came from Europe, but we don't know, or we are not sure about the source of this population. Could be British, or also could be Spain for the colonization history of this, the colonization in North America. But in Africa, the studies are less than in another part of the world. All the details that we have about the colonization history in Africa came from two studies. The first one, using mitochondrial DNA, suggests that they are a very high mitochondrial diversity in Musculus domesticus. And for example, the north of Africa is very different from the population from the East and Central Africa. Another study from Lipiens in 2017, using microsatellite data, suggests that in Senegal, there are two different groups of Musculus domesticus, genetic groups, but according to the results of this project, it came from only one invasion event in Senegal, and then in situ, it diversified in the south, following the colonization history of Senegal, first in Saint Louis and second in Dakar. Another interesting thing when the species change the distribution range is that species can meet another species and hybridization can occur. Well, this is the case of Musculus domesticus. The Musculus domesticus colonize Europe and meet another species, Musis pretus, who is present in the north of Africa, but also is present in the Peninsula Iberica. And genomic data in this study evidence that this species hybridize with Musculus domesticus and Musis pretus in this area of sympathy. Well, with these things in mind, the objective of this study was to understand the invasion history of the house mouse in Africa, answering three basic questions. The first, when the house mouse colonized Africa. The second one, from where the house mouse colonized Africa, and if hybridization is occurring in the African population. To answer that, we sequenced 333 house mouse genomes across Europe, the West Asia, and Africa, around 26 sampling locations. And we also use genomes that are available are already published, including also the subspecies and Musis pretus here in Spain. That is the species that we have evidence of hybridization. In total, we analyzed 460 genomes. And we found this. The first to answer from where the host mascot inside Africa, we found 3 different genetic groups that involve European population and also the African population. For example, in the Mediterranean group, that is formed from samples from Italia, south of France, Greece, Cyprus, and Spain. This one also includes samples from a population from Tunisia. So the first introduction event is in the north of Africa from the Mediterranean basin. The second group is Iberia, that is formed for population of Portugal and Spain, and also includes the African population from Morocco, Algeria, and Niger. And the third group, the north of Europe, include the European population from Germany, British, Denmark, Belgica, and also African population from Mali, Benin, Senegal, Gabon, and also population from the United States. So we can say now that at least 3 different introduction events occur in Africa, one from the Mediterranean, one from Iberia Peninsula, and one from the north of Europe. We performed an administrative analysis, and it suggests the same results. This big group, the north of Europe, is present in the north of Europe, in the West Africa, Central Africa, and also in the United States. The Mediterranean group is present in the Mediterranean, also in Tunisia, and the Iberian group in Spain and Portugal, and in Morocco and Algeria. To answer the question when the invasion history occurred, we use demography inference, and we found very interesting things. The first is that all the population that is show this pattern, this bottleneck, this reduction of diversity, as you can see. It occurred in all this population about 5,000 years ago. That is the time, according to archaeological evidence, when from the West Asia, the mouse dispersed to Europe. Then, between Europe, the diversification of the 3 lineages that I am told you, the Iberian, the Mediterranean, and the north of Europe, occurred more or less in this time. And between Africa, more or less, more recently, during the last 1,000 years ago. Because we are using genome data, we can reconstruct the population structure of this population in the past. So during 5,000 years ago, it looks like one big group. We don't see very well differences. But more recently, like 3,000 years ago, we start looking at the 3 big groups: the Iberian, the Mediterranean, and the north of Europe. More recently, in the last 500 years ago, we start looking and very separated the population from, for example, from Morocco, Spain, Algeria, very different. We also perform another analysis that is for more recent demographic change, and we see something very interesting. We have the Mediterranean group, and we have the source in Europe, for example, Italy, and the bottleneck that we detect is about 2,000 years ago, but the population from Tunisia came from Spain, for the Mediterranean, the bottleneck that we detect is about 600 years ago. So probably the mouse was introduced in the Tunisia coast about 600 years ago. In the case of Iberia, we see the same pattern. The source in Europe has a very old bottleneck about 4,000 years ago, and the population from Morocco and Algeria recent about 700 years ago. In the case of the north of Europe, we found that the population from Europe, for example, France in the north, Germany, the bottleneck was about 2,000 years ago and 1,000 years ago, but the population from Senegal that came from the Europe was about 500 years ago, 300 years ago, in the case of Senegal. In the case of Gabon, 500 years ago. in Mali 2,200 years ago, and in the case of the United States, 400 years ago. Concerning to the hybridization, we found the same pattern that was already done for another analysis, that all the European population showed this signal of hybridization with Musis pretus, where the Algerian mouse. But this signal is very strong in the population from Spain, that is the sympatric area of both species. In Africa, we also found the same pattern, that all the population from Africa has signal of hybridization with Musis pretus, but this signal is very strong in the north of Africa, where species are really sympatric. This is the full history of the house mouse colonization in Africa. Everything started here 5,000 years ago, when they start colonizing, when European is, sorry, when the colonization in Europe starts 5,000 years ago, then the diversification in Europe, in the north of Europe, in Iberia and in Mediterranean during this period of time. And this is very interesting because our estimates align very well with previous estimates, not only genomic estimates, but also archaeological evidence. Also, the north of Europe then go to the west coast of Africa, Central Africa, and also in the United States, in America. And the group from the Iberia here colonized the north coast of Africa in Morocco and Algeria, and from Italy and France to Tunisia. Just to discuss a little bit, this is very interesting because our estimates align very well too with the history of the north of Africa, that in this period of time, there was two very big dynasties who was very separated, and each one has very high connection, commercial connection. For example, this Tunisia with Italia also has very close geographic, are very close. And this one in Morocco also had very strong relation with the Iberian Peninsula. Also, it's very interesting because the human genomic ancestry in the population, the human population of the north of Africa, showed this same pattern that we detected in the house mouse. The Moroccan are very different from a genetic point of view from the Tunisian, maybe because this geopolitical history also have an impact in the human population, as had in the house mouse colonization. Most in the West and Central Africa, we found that our estimates, the time of the bottleneck in all these locations, align very well with the European exploration, the trade, the colonial expansion of the European countries around the coast of Africa, but also in North America. So as a conclusion, we can say that the house mouse colonization in Africa was very complex, involved several sources in Europe in different times, and also involved integration with native species, making this genomic landscape that we have in Africa's population of mice. Merci beaucoup.